The following presentation is a gift from the team at Streamline Publishing, publishers of Fine Art Connoisseur, Plein Air Magazine, and weekly newsletters Fine Art Today, Realism Today, Plein Air Today, and American Watercolor, and events, the Plein Air Convention and the Figurative Art Convention. We offer over 400 different art instruction tutorials and ultra high-quality video by the world's leading artists. If you like what you see, help us support our artists and our team with your purchase. Each video aired has a special discount code for today only in the comments section with a link to the video offered. And to see everything we do, or if you want to receive notice of new releases, new products, and new events for artists, simply click the other link, which says, "See everything we do." Thank you.
Hi, I'm Eric Rhodes, publisher and founder of Fine Art Connoisseur and Plein Air Magazine. We have a real treat for you today. We're here every day at 3 p.m. We hope you'll continue to join us. Today we have the founder of it all, the person who created the entire art instruction video industry. Her name is Johnnie Liliedahl, a pioneer in this industry. And today she's teaching you basic landscape painting. I hope you enjoy it.
Hello, welcome to my studio. I've just finished painting this landscape that I'd like to share with you, and in a moment I'm going to take you back to the beginning to show you how the painting developed from the first inception. But before we go, I'd like to point out a few things to you that I'd like for you to look for during the process of the painting. This lesson is about landscapes in general, not this painting necessarily in particular. I'd like to give you some things that you can carry into your other painting that would relate no matter what the subject, as long as it is in a landscape with sky, ground, and trees. The most important things in any painting is a division of the masses into an interesting form. And in landscapes, the three most basic masses that you have are the sky, the trees, and the ground. These masses all have a very predictable relationship with each other. And if you follow this relationship all the way through, regardless of the medium that you use, then your paintings will have more believability. First of all, the sky is the source of the light, both the source from the direct sun, which is a warm light. Also, a secondary, very important source is the reflected light from the sky. The color of the sky being blue will reflect the light back down into the landscape in tones that are bluish. But overall, the most important thing to remember is that the sky is the lightest mass in a landscape because it is the light giver. The greatest light receiver in the landscape is the flat plane of the ground. Because it presents a horizontal surface to the light, both direct and indirect, it will reflect more light back up into the viewer's eyes. So even if it's in shadow, the mass of the ground should be indicated as the next lightest value mass in the painting. The trees are vertical mass. Not only are they vertical and therefore receive less light than the horizontal plane, but trees are also an open volume. They're not solid like a wall or a fence. And this very openness is what makes them a dark value, because most of what you see when you look into the foliage of a tree is not the foliage that's on the front side of the tree, but you see through the foliage to the foliage on the back side of the tree, and you're seeing the darks. That's the reason that the trees present a dark shape in the landscape compared to the flat ground plane and the mass of the sky. So in your painting, see if you can maintain this relationship of light, just a little darker, and a lot darker for the trees. If you do, then your paintings will have a truth that makes them believable because these relationships are constant. This will give you a benchmark from which to depart. That is, when we have things that don't fall into this pattern, we'll understand in future videos why they're different and how they violate this basic relationship between very light, light, and dark. let's return to the beginning of the painting and see exactly how it was executed. When my husband and I travel around the world, we find it convenient to take a camera instead of a lot of painting materials. And I've used the camera as a sketchbook for a long time to supplement some of the drawings that I make when I'm on location. The drawings the painting that I'm going to do today was based on the photographs that I'm showing you now. These were taken in Scotland at a manor called Haddo, and these were the grounds surrounding the Haddo house, and I found them beautiful in many respects. Some of the place was wild and looked like it was untouched. Others were immaculately groomed. As we were walking through the grounds, though, we came across this particular place where the walking path split into a fork in the road. And I stopped there and just knew that that had to be a painting, because there was a natural pause to consider whether you wanted to go one direction or the other. And in the middle of this junction between the fork in the road was this wonderful tree shape. Sometimes when you're working with photographs, when you get them back home, you'll find that they just don't impart the feeling that you had when you were there actually looking at the place. But if you remember what was there and you're a painter, then you can reproduce the effect that the place had on you, not by copying it photographically, but by painting the emotions that you felt when you looked at it. Another photograph from the same area, in fact this was within paces of each other, was another tree which was in a lovely stage of red. I'm not a botanist, so I don't know what the species of the tree was, but I felt like it was a beautiful ornamental tree, and it occurred in many places on the grounds as a foil, being in red foliage, to the green foliage that flanked it. Now, if I were simply relying on photography alone to give me the subject of my paintings, well, I would have a rather uninteresting color combination here and a rather uninteresting composition here. But having the artistic license to be able to combine things and incorporate all of the elements of this place that made it special to me, then I can take a tree that's indigenous to the area that I wish had been at the juncture of the fork in this road, and create a composition that's going to be more interesting from a color standpoint, as well as the color composition. So that's what I'll do today, is use the fork in the road as the subject of the painting, and this lovely tree at the place where they meet here. But instead of painting it green, I'm going to use the tree that's in its lovely red foliage. First, what I'll do is divide the canvas into the masses that I talked about earlier in the introduction. Arriving at my ground line, and the fact that the path breaks into a fork. Then, for the placement of the large tree, I don't want to put it in the very center of the canvas because that's not good composition. But I will move it slightly off-center, that is, where the trunk of the tree is not in the exact physical center of the canvas. So giving myself a base for the tree to stand on, and the height that I'll be working with, then referring to the photographs that I'm working from, I'll sketch in this large shape of the main tree form. Doesn't have to be exact, something that's just going to give me the overall shape of the tree. Now, I'm not putting that on very darkly because I don't want too much of this original drawing to show through, and I'm not going to fix the drawing because it will lift when I get to the other stages. Then this tree, which is the focal point at the fork in the road, is flanked by supporting masses. There's a group of trees on the right that aren't quite as interesting. And there's a group of trees on the left, and it's important that I make these shapes different. So just to divide the canvas so I get a feeling of how these trees are going to work with each other in the composition. Behind these trees is a hillside that the trees follow. So there will be a group of trees in the background that go behind this tree and on down. In this area where the road goes over the hill and down, there will be another tree. And we'll eventually make this path very obvious. And a few other incidental trees that will come later. But basically, the canvas has been divided into its most important masses. The ones we talked about earlier, the sky, which is a nice, interesting shape. It's not symmetrical, but it is balanced. That is, the sky comes down to a point here, but it comes down to a lower point over here. We're concerned with balance in a painting, but symmetry and balance are not the same thing. We want an asymmetrical balance on this. The trees, naturally, we want this tree to be the focal point, but we need to flank it with sizes and shapes that will complement the tree rather than take away from it. We don't want a static composition here. So we'll have a variation in the heights of the trees on both sides. One will be taller, one shorter, and that can vary as the painting develops. I work from photographs as simply something to give me an idea. I don't copy photographs. What I want to do is reproduce what this place made me feel like. And the photographs are simply little notes to jog my memory. They're not something that I copied literally, although the place will have the feeling of that particular place at a point in time. It won't be the exact place. The ground level we have with the path coming out and going back into the distance and down the hill on this side. And with that, the drawing is ready to go. Before I begin the painting, I'd like to explain my palette to you. I use a very simple palette based on primary and secondary colors, plus black and white. I don't use pre-mixed browns or grays. I mix all of those from the primary and secondary colors that are on my palette. Those are, beginning on the left side, I put ivory black, which is not considered a color. It's not on the color wheel as one of the colors, but it is a necessary element. Breaking my palette here between the black and the rest of the colors that are on the palette, you'll notice that they're in a particular arrangement from green to blue to violet to red to orange and yellow. If I were to take this palette from green to yellow and pull it into a circle, I'd have a perfect color wheel. The colors are arranged on my palette in a specific relationship to each other. That is, the color that it's next to has a relationship with it, just as it would on the color wheel. I don't put my colors out haphazardly or with no organization. It's always in a very organized fashion. The first color on the wheel, or the first color on the palette, is phthalo green. Next to that is phthalo blue. Then comes ultramarine blue. Dioxazine purple is my violet. In the reds, alizarin crimson and cadmium red light, cadmium orange, Indian yellow, and cad yellow light. You'll notice that I've included 2 of each primary color and 1 of each secondary color. I have 1 green, 1 violet, and 1 orange. 2 blues, 2 reds, and 2 yellows. Of the 2 of each of the primary colors, they're separated by temperature. I have a warm and a cool of each of the primary colors. A warm blue, which is phthalo blue, a cool blue, which is ultramarine blue, a cool red, which is alizarin crimson, a warm red, which is cadmium red light, and of the yellows, a warm yellow, which is Indian yellow, and a cold yellow, which is cad yellow light. Now there are many other colors that you can substitute for these particular selections, but I feel like that a basic full spectrum palette must include warm and cool colors of all 3 primaries. I'd like to call your attention to one color in particular on my palette, and that is the Indian yellow. The Indian yellow looks like a gold and perhaps even an earth color sitting here on the palette by itself. But when it's extended with a medium or mixed with white, you'll find that this hue is very close to cad yellow medium, particularly because of the one characteristic of its transparency. Because it's transparent, you're able to mix darker colors than you would be able to if you were using only cad yellow medium, which is opaque. The transparent Indian yellow allows you to mix very, very dark browns, grays, and greens using this color. The other colors on my palette, if you will notice, sitting here before they're used, look very dark. The ones that are very dark are transparent, and that's usually an indication, not always, but usually an indication of whether the color is transparent or opaque. Most of the work that I do in my paintings is with transparent colors, so it's very important that I get as many transparent colors on the palette to begin with as possible, because that's where the range of color is developed, as you'll see when we work through the beginning stages and the intermediate stages. I do work with opaque colors, but they come at very nearly the end of the painting. You may be wondering, well, where is white? I don't use white on the palette until I'm to almost the finishing stages of the painting. To me, white is the culprit in most people's paintings that causes that inevitable mud. And if you can eliminate white for as long as possible, then you're not going to have that problem cropping up, at least in the beginning. So I never put white out on my palette, particularly in the beginning stages, and when we get to the opaques, I'll explain then how I do use it. If you'd like to know any of the paints by name, you can refer to the enclosed literature, which will give you a complete list of all the materials that I'll use in this painting today, including some of the mixtures that I used in particular areas. If you'd like to follow along and paint this painting on your own at some time, I think you'll find those instructions particularly useful. When I begin a painting, I usually start in an area that's going to give me the most impact as soon as possible. The object is to see what the painting is going to do for me initially. I don't want to spend a lot of time working in an area that is that's unimportant. So to get to the crux of the matter, I want to paint the center of interest first. I'll begin by spreading my medium out on the palette and adding the colors to it. Since the primary center of interest area is this large tree, that's the area where I'll begin. The colors that I'm using for this central tree are a rusty red violet that I mix with my transparent yellow, transparent red, and transparent purple. I thin the colors with a painting medium to get lighter values. The medium that I use is Winsor Newton's Liquin. All the paints have Liquin in them in the underpainting stage. If you don't use a thinning medium, your transparent colors will appear to be black because they're darker when they're undiluted. Notice that the brush that I'm using is a long-haired, soft sable type brush or a natural hair brush. I use it fully loaded with the thinned paint, and the stroke that I'm taking is pulling toward the central trunk. This is important for setting up the shape of the tree. You don't have to paint individual leaves of foliage if you establish the mass belonging to the structure that supports it. In almost all cases, my strokes are quite loose, and I don't take individual strokes to suggest individual leaves. The mass is the most important thing. You'll notice that I use darker values in the parts of the mass that are on the darker side of the tree and the interior suggestions of foliage. The areas on the outer edges I lighten with liquid to create lighter values. This is the way the old masters did it, and I'm following that procedure today. Because they had a shortage of pigment, they had to make what little pigment they had do all the work for them. So they used it thin in areas that were light and heavier in darker areas. If you get your values just right at this point, you'll have to do little or no highlighting in the opaque phase. And in this particular demonstration, I'm going to work diligently to avoid having to put opaque highlights on the foliage of this tree and the others as well. I will use some selected areas of opaque highlights, but what you see here is basically what the tree will look like in its lighter areas when the painting is completely finished. I like to set the tree down with a shadow to anchor it to the ground. In the very beginning, it establishes the direction of light from the left and keeps the tree from floating off into space. The trees that flank it on the other side are a green color, and I'm using primarily my transparent yellow and ultramarine blue to create different shades of green. The more yellow I use, the warmer in value. I'm using the liquid to create lighter values. I'll use more pigment for darker values. Since the direction of light is from the left, this area will be in sunlight, being the left side of this clump of trees, and warmer and lighter than the ones you'll see on the left. When you're painting the interior of these trees, the green trees, you'll want to add more ultramarine blue to make the greens cooler. Temperature can suggest shadow as much as value can, so if we have a contrast between the cool interior and the light exterior that faces the light, then you'll create the illusion of light and shadow within these trees. Notice that I'm still maintaining a stroke that suggests the structure of the limbs that are holding the foliage. Some of these greens are softened and neutralized with the addition of the colors that we used in the central tree. The trees on the left over here are going to be overall darker and cooler in color because the source of the light is behind these trees. They're more in silhouette than the ones on the right side of the canvas. I'll use more ultramarine blue and some purples in the shadows, the deep shadows of this greenery. Once again, to change the temperature between the warm and the cool to define light and dark. You'll notice my brush strokes are still quite loose. I'm more concerned with the contour of the mass than I am with any individual detail. I work quickly and loosely in this stage of the painting, trying to lay down local color and some feeling of light and dark without making my darks too dark. When you're painting a tree form, I think if we have to isolate the single most important element to make that a believable shape. It is its outer contour. That's what tells your viewer that it's a tree, rather than any particular delicate stroke or leaf stroke. The shape of the mass itself is what defines the form. So I'll be more concerned with contour than any other kind of shape. Just as I did with the central tree, I'm going to set this down on the ground by casting its shadow across the path. I'll use the same colors that are in the tree, very, very thin. These are the main dark areas in the painting, the three large masses of dark. We have some subordinate areas of dark, but because they're farther away, I'm going to lighten those in value just a bit. This is the first stage of the painting, not the final stage. So I don't have to get it as dark as I eventually want it to be. I'll have lots of opportunities, hopefully many, many opportunities, to make the painting darker where it needs to be. What I'm doing at the moment is setting up the largest, darkest masses into shapes that are not repetitive of each other and that have some interest all by themselves, so that they make interesting forms regardless of the fact that they're simply trees. In the background now, though, I want to get into the dark areas that flank these. Because they're farther away, they'll be a little bit lighter in value. And to lighten them, I'll simply add a little bit more of my painting medium and a bit more of my blue, because the blue introduces an atmospheric effect. It's all right if the edges blend together, because this is not the finished painting. What we're doing is setting up areas that'll be finished and developed in the next stages. We want to get everything on as quickly as possible so that we can see how the entire painting is going to work. We don't want to stop and fiddle with any one thing. Any shape or color in this painting can be changed if it doesn't fit, but you can't know whether it's going to fit until you have all the pieces on the canvas. So there's no point in fiddling before it's time for the music to play. Notice that in some places I'm losing the edges of this large central tree, and that's exactly what I'm trying to do. I have a saying that I like to pass on, and that is, I don't like to commit myself to edges too early in a painting. That is, if I have a strong dark edge, it makes it more difficult for me to change it in the beginning phases without the use of opaque paints. And I do want to avoid at all costs using too many opaques in the beginning, or any for that matter. Opaques are for adding the sparkle and life to a painting. They are what I like to put on at the end as the icing on the cake, not the cake. My transparent colors are the cake. So at the moment, what we're trying to do is get a feeling for whether or not the color of the mass makes us think it's close to us or far away. Cool colors recede into the distance, warm colors advance. So the cooler I paint those trees in the distance, the more they're going to feel like they're going into the distance. Now this should all feel like it's melting together in terms of value, but color-wise, we see a play across here. Obviously, the red tree is the one that is the focal point in this beginning phase. It's not going to remain that dark or that intense, but if I put the intensity down first, then I'll be able to subdue it later on. It's much easier to subdue something that's too intense than it is to bring it up if it's dead flat in the beginning. So let's get as much color on as possible. Here's a nice earth color for you. Mixing your warm yellow, transparent yellow, with your violet will give you beautiful, beautiful earth tones. You can go all the way from a sienna color to a raw sienna down to almost a burnt umber look, but by varying the proportions of yellow to purple. And I find that many of the beiges and browns that I like to use come right out of that color range. I'm using the light yellow in the path area that I feel will be struck by sunlight. Maybe a little piece in the distance over there will suggest that little path that was down over the hill and down. And in the areas of shadow, I'll simply add more purple, purple being a nice shadow color to indicate the ground in shadow. The colors in the grass areas will be a repetition of those that I used in the trees, because we want the color to relate throughout the painting. And I'm not interested in getting too much in the way of additional color into the painting at this point. What I'm more concerned about is getting the feeling of sunlight and shadow by the use of warm and cool colors. I can introduce many other interesting colors in the next phase, in the glazing stage. I'm repeating the colors that were in the trees in their warm and cool varieties. Again, trying not to commit myself to too much of an edge anywhere. I don't want to say that the edge of the road is hard and fast, because I'll change that in later phases. You'll notice that when I start painting with a particular brush, I almost always use that brush throughout this initial phase in the underpainting. I find it distracting to change brushes in the middle of this, because it should be a very quick process. You want to know what's going on as quickly as possible in your painting, and switching brushes slows me down. Now, this gives me an idea of where all the major things are in the painting. Then I can step back and take a look and see if there's something that needs changing compositionally. I know there's going to be one thing, that little straight area across there gives us a stop, so that's pretty uninteresting. I might change the shape here, or when I paint the sky in, I'll paint it down and change the shape there. But at this point, I have all my masses laid in. I have the lightest area in the sky. The white canvas is standing for that. I don't have to actually put any paint on the canvas in order for that light value to read as a light value at this point. The next lightest value in the painting is the ground plane, because that's the light receiver, as we talked about. And then The upright plane, which are the trees, should be the darkest in the painting. We can increase this value contrast in the next phase, and many times I like to leave this as light as possible in order to get the most opportunity of color from the glazing that will eventually go over this. This is a stage where the painting needs to dry. The liquid painting medium will cause it to dry more quickly. If you will leave it for maybe 30 minutes and come back to it, it should be dry to the touch, and that's all it needs to be, is just dry to the touch. It doesn't have to be bone dry, although it can be. But the glazing, that is laying another layer of transparent colors over the first one that you put down, is where many of the really beautiful jewel-like colors come from in this technique. So I would encourage you to leave your values maybe a little bit lighter, and that will give you the opportunity to glaze many more times. If you put it on too dark, then you can't glaze, because every time you glaze, the painting will get darker. The only way you can make this lighter is to paint an opaque over it. And we don't want to have to use opaques to correct. We want to use our opaques as the icing on the cake, not as a correction. We'll use all of our glazing as a way to correct both color and value until we get to that last point when we want that icing on the cake. So let's let this dry for a moment while we talk about the palette, and we'll come back to it and put those glazes on there. I'd like for you to turn your attention to the palette now. You may have noticed that my palette is in both a gray tone and a white. And there is a reason for that. The reason is, should be perfectly obvious to you, and that is, if you're working with transparent paints, which I do, that the transparent paints over a gray tone tend to look cooler and darker. The reason for that is that they are transparent. You can see right through them to the gray palette, and the gray is going to tone them down. Those same colors over a white palette tend to show that they have a lot more pigmentation. They're more intense, more brilliant, and warmer because the yellows and the reds in the paints themselves show much better on the white. I'd rather make my mistakes on the palette rather than on the canvas, and since I am working on a white background canvas, then whatever color I mix down here on my white palette, I know exactly what it's going to be before I put it up on the canvas itself. So that's the reason for the split palette. I depend on it to give me the colors so that I don't have to experiment up there on the surface of the canvas. When I get to the opaques, you'll see that the gray palette is just as important for mixing the opaques as the white palette is for mixing the transparent colors. But while I'm cleaning this up, and by the way, you can clean a glass palette. This is nothing more than a 1/4-inch piece of plate glass that I got from my local glass store, painted on the back with an acrylic gray and acrylic white. Cleans up very easily with a carpenter's or a painter's tool. You just spread it off and it cleans up there. While I'm finishing this, let's review some of the important points that we've covered so far. I prepared this canvas previously so that it's completely dry, and you can get the best effect if you do allow your painting to totally dry at this point. Notice that I can rub my hand completely across it and nothing moves. For glazing to work properly, you do need to have a dry surface. If you work with a surface that's tacky, glazing will still work as long as you only lay a little bit of paint on at a time, and in very thin layers, but only one layer at a time. If you want to come back and glaze again a third or a fourth time even, that can be done, and you'll get beautiful effects, but you need to let it dry between each stage. because of our filming limitations today, I've prepared a second canvas so that we can continue with the painting. Once you do the glazing, you don't need to let the painting dry before you continue on to the opaque or finishing stages of the painting. It's only at the first stage. The painting at this stage is not what I consider a painting. It really is just a drawing in color. It's a value drawing. And the stage that I work in getting the values and the local colors on the canvas, right up to the point where I begin to add my opaques, I call the underpainting. That includes laying it on in the first stage, as you just observed, and it also includes the stage that I'm going to apply now, which will be the glazing that goes over this. Once I've got my values correct and most of the color corrections made, then I will consider the underpainting to be finished, and I'll move on to what I call the overpainting. And that's the point where I lay the opaques over the underpainting that's been set up in the earlier phases. There's nothing at this stage that is inviolable that I can't change or that I might not change. The painting is in flux. It's going to move. Some of the shapes may change. The colors definitely will change. And this is the point where I begin to refine not only colors but the values of all of the different masses in the painting. Until I get to the overpainting opaque phase, I won't do anything to the sky area. The white of the canvas will remain white. No paint will go on to it. If it bothers you, you may add just a thin light coat of whatever color you would like to paint the sky. It could be a pale blue, a pale gray, if you don't want to work with the white canvas. But I find the white canvas to be a nice bright contrast to the darks that I'm laying on. I'll be working with the same medium to thin my paints. And now what I want to do is to get the colors of each of the individual parts, that is the red tree and those of the green tree, to feel like they belong together a bit more. I have the basic character of this tree, the red tree, laid down at the first stage. I may lay many colors over it, but that red is always going to come through as long as what I put on top of it is transparent. So the character will never go away unless I paint it opaquely, which I will not paint it opaquely. It will always be transparent. There are three things that you want to try to accomplish in the glazing phase, and that is to create a color excitement, refine the values, and to create three-dimensional form. Once you've got the local color of the mass laid down, and local color is that single color that you would describe something. If someone asks you, what color is that tree? Well, this one is green, and this one is a red-violet. That's what local color is. Doesn't mean that there can't be other colors in among it, those colors, but the local color will describe it as a single adjective. When we're laying on glazes, it's best to use pure pigment. The transparent colors themselves are going to lay over something that's already painted. For instance, I have a thin ultramarine blue on my brush. As I lay it, and you might take a closer look at this, as I lay it over the area that's been previously painted, you can see it affects it, but it doesn't paint it blue. If it were blue, it would be that color. See, that's the color that's on my brush. Now, I'm not going to leave that blue out there. And this is how easy you can change things like that. But you see, you don't have to mix colors to glaze over something that's already been painted. When I glaze, I'm going to be a bit more particular about where I put colors and the shapes that they create. Remember that when you glaze, whatever you're...
That's Johnnie Liliedahl and Basic Landscape Painting. You can learn more about that video by going to streamline.art, and we have a special discount code for you in the comments section. Take advantage of that because it's for today only. Thank you for watching.